Emma slammed the door behind her and tossed her backpack onto the floor of her room, the dull thud mirroring her mood. Another long day of school. Another night of listening to her parents' predictable routine of dinner, TV, and bed. She couldn't put her finger on why, but something about the predictability of it all was starting to feel off. Her mom, Clara, had been acting weird lately. Normally cheerful but grounded, Clara had transformed into someone Emma barely recognized. Someone distracted, giggly, and almost like a teenager again. There was always a reason for Clara to grab her phone, to step out of the room, or to offer vague answers when Emma or her dad asked about her day. Emma first thought it was just a phase. Everyone needed their space, right? But the growing number of conversations with their neighbor, Mr. Reynolds, made Emma uneasy. He was always there, seemingly ready with a kind smile or a favor. He'd mow his lawn and somehow wander over to chat with Clara about garden care or neighborhood gossip. "I'm just being paranoid," Emma muttered to herself one afternoon. But her thoughts churned as she remembered how often she'd seen the two of them laughing by the fence or exchanging glances when they thought no one was looking. One evening, as Emma sat on the couch doing homework, she heard her dad, Tom, calling for Clara. "Hey, hon, did you see the utility bill? I left it on the counter." Clara was out in the backyard, her voice faint as she replied, "Just a minute." Emma peeked through the window. There was her mom, standing by the fence with Mr. Reynolds. His expression was animated, and Clara tilted her head back with laughter. She leaned slightly toward him, their bodies angled in a way that felt too intimate for a casual neighborly chat. Emma frowned and went back to her homework, shaking her head. She didn't want to jump to conclusions, but something about it stuck with her. The following week, Emma came home from school earlier than usual. A teacher's meeting had canceled her last class, and she decided to skip hanging out with her friends at the coffee shop. The house was unusually quiet when she unlocked the door, her footsteps echoing faintly in the hallway. She grabbed an apple from the kitchen counter and froze mid-bite when she heard muffled voices coming from the living room. "We have to be more careful," came a voice that was unmistakably her mom's. "You're worrying too much," said another voice, a man's voice. Emma's stomach tightened. Slowly, she walked toward the living room, her socked feet silent on the hardwood floor. Peeking around the corner, she saw them, her mom and Mr. Reynolds. Clara stood close to him, her arms crossed, a nervous smile on her face. Mr. Reynolds' hand rested lightly on her arm, his thumb brushing her skin in a way that sent Emma's heart pounding. "Are you sure no one's going to find out?" Clara asked, her voice a whisper. Mr. Reynolds chuckled softly. "Not unless you tell them." Emma's apple slipped from her hand and hit the floor with a loud thud. Both adults turned to look at her, their expressions shifting from surprise to panic. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma stood frozen in the doorway, her gaze darting between her mom and Mr. Reynolds. Clara's face drained of color, while Mr. Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, his hand falling back to his side. "Emma," Clara began, her voice trembling. Emma felt like she'd just been hit by a truck. Her mind raced, trying to process what she'd just seen and heard. The casual touches, the whispered words. Her suspicions were no longer just paranoia. "What's going on?" Emma asked, her voice tight. Clara took a hesitant step forward. "Sweetheart, it's not what it looks like." Emma let out a bitter laugh. "Oh, really? Because it looks like you're sneaking around with our neighbor." Mr. Reynolds cleared his throat, his usual charm gone. "Maybe I should go." "No," Emma snapped, her glare cutting through him. "You're not going anywhere." Clara shot him a desperate look, and he reluctantly stayed put. Emma crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing at her mother. "How long has this been going on?" she demanded. "Emma, please," Clara's voice cracked. "How long, Mom?" Emma's voice rose, her emotions breaking through the surface. Clara hesitated, her lips trembling as she tried to find the words. It's not serious. It's just been a few months." "A few months?" Emma's chest tightened. "And Dad has no idea, does he?" "Emma, you don't understand," Clara pleaded. "Your father and I, things haven't been the same. We've been distant for years, and I didn't plan for this to happen. That doesn't make it okay." Emma shouted, tears stinging her eyes. Mr. Reynolds took a cautious step toward the door. I think it's best if I leave. This is a family matter. Yeah, you think? Emma shot back, her voice dripping with sarcasm. Without another word, Mr. Reynolds slipped out the back door, leaving Emma and Clara alone in the living room. The tension hung heavy in the air. Clara reached out toward her daughter, but Emma stepped back, shaking her head. Do you even care about what this is going to do to Dad? To me? To our family? Of course I care, Clara said, tears streaming down her face. But it's complicated, Emma. Your dad and we're not happy. We haven't been for a long time. Then talk to him. Emma snapped. Work it out or don't. But this? Sneaking around with the guy next door? It's disgusting. Clara flinched, her shoulders sagging. I didn't mean for you to find out like this. Emma scoffed. Oh, so it's fine as long as no one finds out? Great parenting, Mom. The weight of the confrontation pressed down on both of them. Emma's anger burned hot, but beneath it was a deep sadness. This was her mom, the person she'd looked up to her whole life, and now, she felt like she didn't even know her. I can't deal with this right now, Emma said, her voice shaky. She turned and stormed up the stairs, slamming her bedroom door behind her. That night, Emma lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her thoughts were a chaotic swirl of anger, betrayal, and confusion. She thought about her dad, blissfully unaware of the storm brewing under his own roof. Should she tell him? Part of her wanted to blurt everything out, to force her mom to face the consequences of her actions. But another part of her hesitated, knowing it would shatter her family. The sound of muffled crying drifted up from downstairs. Emma knew it was her mom, but she couldn't bring herself to go comfort her. For the first time in her life, Emma didn't know what to do. The next morning, Emma woke up with a heavy heart. Her mom's betrayal lingered like a dark cloud, and the thought of facing her parents, especially her dad, made her stomach churn. She got dressed and crept downstairs, hoping to avoid a conversation. But Clara was already in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a mug of coffee. Her eyes were red and swollen, a tissue crumpled in her hand. Emma hesitated in the doorway, unsure whether to bolt or confront her again. Emma, Clara said softly when she noticed her. Can we talk? Emma sighed, crossing her arms as she leaned against the doorframe. What's there to talk about? You cheated. You lied. End of story. Clara flinched but nodded. You're right. What I've done is unforgivable. But you need to understand, Emma, your dad and I haven't been happy for a long time. I'm not excusing what I did. I'm just trying to explain. Explain? Emma's voice rose. What could you possibly explain that would make this okay? Clara took a deep breath, her hands trembling around her mug. Your father works so much. We barely talk anymore, and when we do, it's always about bills or schedules or nothing meaningful. I felt invisible, Emma. And then Mr. Reynolds, Alan, he paid attention to me. He made me feel like I mattered again. Emma's jaw tightened. So instead of fixing things with Dad, you ran to the neighbor? That's your excuse? Clara looked down, ashamed. I didn't plan for this to happen. I know I've made a terrible mistake. You think? Emma snapped. Dad's been working his butt off to support us, and this is how you repay him? Clara's shoulders shook as she started to cry again. Emma felt a flicker of guilt, but quickly pushed it aside. I'm not the one you should be crying to, Emma said, her voice cold. You need to tell Dad. Clara's head shot up, her face pale. Emma, no, please. If your dad finds out, he deserves to know. Emma cut her off. You don't get to keep this from him just because it's inconvenient for you. Clara opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of the front door opening stopped her. Emma's heart dropped. Morning. Tom called from the hallway. Clara wiped her tears hastily, trying to compose herself as Tom walked into the kitchen. He smiled at Emma, then glanced at Clara, his brow furrowing. Everything okay? He asked, his voice filled with concern. Emma looked at her mom, her chest tightening. You tell him or I will, she said, her voice low but firm. Clara's face crumpled, but she nodded slowly. What's going on? Tom asked, his smile fading as he looked between them. Clara's voice was barely a whisper. Tom, I need to tell you something. Emma couldn't watch. She grabbed her backpack and bolted out the door, the sound of her mom's trembling voice following her as she started her confession. Emma wandered aimlessly through the neighborhood, her mind racing. What was her dad going to do? Would he leave? Would her family ever be the same? She found herself at the park near their house, sitting on the swings. The usually comforting creak of the chains felt hollow today. Emma pulled out her phone, tempted to text her best friend, but she hesitated. How could she even begin to explain this? An hour later, she headed home, dreading what she might find. The house was eerily quiet when she walked in. Her dad's car was gone, and her mom was sitting alone in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. Emma's heart sank. "Where's Dad?" she asked. Clara didn't look at her. "He needed some time to think," she said quietly. Emma sat down on the armrest of the couch, unsure what to say. For the first time, her mom looked truly broken. "I know you're angry with me," Clara said after a long silence, "and you have every right to be, but I'm going to fix this. Somehow." Emma wanted to believe her, but the damage had already been done. "What happens now?" Emma asked softly. Clara shook her head. "I don't know. I hope your dad will come back, and we can figure out a way forward. As a family." Emma nodded, though uncertainty gnawed at her. She wasn't sure if things could ever go back to how they were, or if she even wanted them to. The following days passed like a blur, heavy and tense. Emma kept to herself, barely speaking to her mom, and her dad still hadn't come home. The weight of the situation pressed on her chest, leaving her restless and uneasy. One evening, as Emma sat at the dinner table pushing food around her plate, the sound of the front door opening made her freeze. Her dad's familiar footsteps echoed in the hall. "Tom." Clara's voice was tentative as she stood up from the couch. Emma watched as her dad walked into the room, his face drawn and tired. He dropped his keys onto the table, his gaze briefly meeting Emma's before settling on Clara. "We need to talk," he said, his tone steady but cold. Emma stood, not wanting to be in the crossfire. "I'll go upstairs," she muttered, but Tom shook his head. "No. Stay," he said firmly. "You're part of this family, and you deserve to hear this too." Emma hesitated but sat back down, her heart pounding. Clara fidgeted nervously, wringing her hands. "Tom, No," Tom interrupted, holding up a hand. "You've already said enough. Now it's my turn." The silence was deafening as he sat down across from Clara, his expression unreadable. "I've spent the last few days trying to figure out where we went wrong," he began. "Wondering if I worked too much, if I didn't give you enough attention, if this was somehow my fault." Clara's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't interrupt. "But then I realized something," Tom continued. "Marriage isn't perfect. It's hard, and it takes work. Work I thought we were both committed to. And instead of talking to me, instead of trying to fix things, you turned to him." Clara wiped her eyes, her voice shaky. "I know I made a terrible mistake, Tom. I'm so sorry. I should have come to you. I should have been honest." "But you weren't," Tom said, his voice rising slightly. "You lied. To me, to Emma, to yourself." Emma shifted uncomfortably in her seat, feeling like an intruder in her own home. "What happens now?" Clara asked, her voice barely audible. Tom sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know, Clara. I really don't. I need time to think about what's best for me, for Emma, for all of us." He turned to Emma, his expression softening. "I'm sorry you had to be dragged into this, sweetheart. None of this is your fault." Emma nodded, her throat tight. "I just want us to be okay," she said quietly. Tom gave her a small, sad smile. "So do I." He stood, grabbing his keys from the table. "I'll be staying at your Uncle Mike's for a while. I need space to figure things out." Clara sobbed quietly as Tom walked toward the door. He paused, looking back at her. "I don't hate you, Clara," he said, "but I can't look at you the same way right now." The door clicked shut, leaving a hollow silence in its wake. The aftermath. The next week was surreal. Clara tried her best to keep things normal, making dinner, asking Emma about school, but the strain was obvious. Emma barely responded, too consumed by her own whirlwind of emotions. One afternoon, while Emma sat in her room scrolling aimlessly through her phone, she got a text from her dad. "Dad, want to grab dinner tonight? Just us?" Her heart lifted slightly. She quickly replied, agreeing to meet him at their favorite diner. Over burgers and milkshakes, Emma finally felt like she could breathe again. Her dad looked tired but more relaxed than he had at home. "How are you holding up?" he asked. Emma shrugged. "I don't know. I'm angry at Mom, but I don't know how to feel about everything. I hate what she did, but I still love her." Tom nodded. "It's okay to feel that way. She's still your mom, even if she made a mistake, a big one. And I love her too, but love doesn't erase what she did." Emma looked down at her milkshake, stirring it with her straw. "Do you think you'll ever forgive her?" Tom sighed, his eyes distant. "Maybe, but forgiveness doesn't mean things go back to how they were. It's going to take time to figure out if we can rebuild what we had." Emma nodded, feeling a mix of hope and sadness. Months later, the house felt lighter now. Tom had started coming home on weekends, slowly rebuilding his relationship with Clara. They'd started therapy together, trying to piece things back together. For Emma, things were still complicated. Her mom had apologized over and over, but trust was hard to rebuild. Still, Emma could see her trying, being more present, listening, and taking responsibility for her actions. One evening, as the family sat around the dinner table, Tom cleared his throat. "I just want to say, I'm proud of us for trying," he said. "This hasn't been easy, but we're making progress. Together." Clara smiled weakly, her eyes shining with gratitude. Emma looked at her parents, a flicker of hope igniting in her chest. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. It had been 3 months since Emma had walked in on her mom and Mr. Reynolds, and the fragile sense of normalcy that had started to form was shattered one evening with a single announcement. Clara called Emma and Tom into the living room after dinner, her expression unusually calm. "Too calm. I need to talk to both of you," she said, her voice steady but detached. Tom leaned back on the couch, crossing his arms. Emma sat on the armchair, her stomach twisting with dread. "What is it?" Tom asked, his tone wary. Clara took a deep breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking. About my life, about us, about everything. And I've realized that staying here, trying to patch things up, isn't what I want." Tom's brow furrowed, and Emma's heart sank. "What are you saying?" Tom asked, his voice tight. "I'm saying I'm leaving," Clara said, her words landing like a bomb. Emma shot up from her seat. "What?" "I've decided to go on a trip, a long one," Clara continued, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I've been talking to Alan, Mr. Reynolds, and we've decided to travel together. To start fresh." Tom stared at her, his face a mask of disbelief. "You're leaving your family? For him?" Clara flinched but held her ground. "I know it sounds selfish, and maybe it is, but I can't stay here pretending everything is fine when it's not. I've spent my whole life trying to be the perfect wife, the perfect mom, and somewhere along the way, I lost myself. This is something I need to do." Emma's hands balled into fists. "What about me? What about Dad? You're just going to abandon us because you lost yourself?" Clara's eyes filled with tears. "Emma, this isn't about you or your dad. This is about me. I need to find happiness, and I can't do that here." Tom stood, his face red with anger. "So that's it? You're just walking away? After everything we've been through?" Clara looked at him with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I've made up my mind, Tom. I'll be leaving tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" Emma's voice cracked. "You're not even giving us time to process this?" "I thought it would be easier this way," Clara said softly. "Easier for who?" Tom snapped. Clara didn't answer. The next morning, Clara's bags were packed and waiting by the door. She moved around the house with a quiet efficiency, avoiding Tom and Emma's angry glares. When the time came, she stood by the door, looking at them one last time. "I love you both," she said, her voice breaking. "I hope one day you'll understand." Tom didn't respond, his jaw clenched. Emma crossed her arms, refusing to look at her mom. Clara's shoulders sagged, and without another word, she picked up her bags and walked out the door. Life without Clara. The house felt emptier without Clara, but the absence of tension was almost a relief. Emma and Tom settled into a new routine, leaning on each other as they navigated the fallout of Clara's decision. Tom threw himself into work, but he always made time for Emma, whether it was cooking dinner together or watching movies late into the night. One evening, as they sat on the couch eating takeout, Tom turned to Emma. "How are you holding up?" Emma shrugged. "Better than I thought I'd be. I mean, it still hurts, but I don't think I miss her." "Not really." Tom nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's okay to feel that way. What she did was selfish. But we'll be okay, Emma. We've got each other." Emma smiled faintly. "Yeah, we do." Clara's journey. Clara and Alan traveled across Europe, posting pictures of picturesque landscapes and cozy cafes on social media. Emma couldn't bring herself to look at the posts, but she overheard whispers from neighbors and friends. "She looks so happy," one neighbor said. "Happy?" Emma thought bitterly. "She looks like a coward." Clara occasionally sent texts to Emma, short messages like, "Thinking of you," or "Hope school's going well." Emma never replied. A year later, on a quiet Sunday morning, Emma and Tom sat in the backyard, sipping coffee and enjoying the cool breeze. It had been over a year since Clara had left, and while the pain of her absence lingered, Emma and her dad had found strength in their bond. "Do you think she regrets it?" Emma asked suddenly. Tom was quiet for a moment, then said, "Maybe. Maybe not. But that's not for us to worry about anymore. We've got our own lives to live." Emma nodded, a small smile tugging at her lips. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace.